giant robots. That's the answer to the modern day question, what's more enjoyable than a Nick Cannon Eminem rap battle? Well, yeah, technically anything's better than listening to the equivalent of real-life Parappa the Rapper in a cadaver's nutsack wearing a cotton twill army cap singing into the mic. But today, it's going to be about being giant robots. We've wanted to do it since we were little kids. We've wanted to do this, and this, and this. Maybe not that last one, but we watched Pacific Rim and GoBots and Transformers and Robot Jocks. We've seen good games of all kinds in this genre, from Hawken and Chromehounds, Steel Battalion with its controller that required a bank loan and a kitchen table's worth of real estate to use. We had Mech Assault from Day One Studios and its sequel Mech Assault 2, Try Harder Next Time. But we also had the two biggies, based on what is considered the fiction that started this entire thing. And that's Battletech and Mechwarrior, with Battletech from Harebrained coming just recently. That was a turn-based attempt, and the Mechwarrior series going back decades. From the seminal Mechwarrior 2, the much-maligned Mechwarrior Online, and now Mechwarrior 5 Mercenaries from Piranha Games, continuing that first and third-person goodness that we always hoped for. Let's see if Piranha Games can deliver us the mech equivalent of the Atlas, or if they're just another Assassin's variant, a threadbare attempt at cashing in, throwing quality and caution to the wind. The game comes out December 10th for PC on the Epic Store for $49.99. Let's see how it did, shall we? As always, if you like a video, maybe subscribe and hit the notification button. Graphics are up first. 1 second you're circle strafing some little locust bastard who's the equivalent of David smashing Goliath with foam rocks for like 50 minutes, and you're hammering down on everything around him, shooting rounds the size of humans out and destroying the city as you go. That's not bad. The landscapes look interesting as well, and the game never holds your hand when it comes to verticality, especially at times eschewing the straight line to the job site that we've seen in other games for a find-your-own-way mentality, even if that means the long way around. It's not entirely new or unique, but since you're piloting these lumbering things, it can be a little bit tricky. And the mechs up close don't look half bad at all, with nice damage detailing showing sparks and fire erupting from gaping holes where mechs' right arms should be. And the weapon effects themselves throw off expected amounts of fire and sparks all over the battlefield when a heavy hit lays out a battle mech's innards and makes them bare. Or when you smash through leg armor of an enemy and see him sort of shamble along, dragging it behind him. That's all pretty good. The problem is, that does not continue. For some reason, the game's enemies have a huge amount of ragdoll applied to them on death, and sometimes when you kill a mech, they just start shaking around like that dude in Jacob's Ladder, then shoot off into the air. And then we get to the pop-in. Grass and shrubs and trees and rocks just sort of pop in, like the game engine looked away at a TikTok video, then looked back and was like, oops, my bad, and just threw a bunch of crap on the ground. There are other times, like crunching over the tops of some snowy crag, getting ready to jump on the heads of an enemy mech, where the entire feel and look of Mechwarrior 5 is excellent. It's just that for all its bells and whistles, it never really comes together. I think it's hard to argue just how cool it is to go head-to-head with a mech that looks like it has a smiley face painted on its crotch. That is high art. Now, when it comes to performance, Mechwarrior 5 is solidly in the middle bracket. On a high-end 2080 Ti with a current Gen i7 at 4.7, it runs from 50 FPS all the way up to 120 at 4K, just depending on what you're looking at and doing with the engine render scale slider, which I have to say, of course, we need to see in all games. It definitely helps in this title. Now, with some settings, you can rein that in. 1440p resolution and 1080p, trying to look for 60 FPS frame rates are right in line with the typical 1080 Ti and 1080 GTX cards that you would expect. We're going to cover a little bit about gameplay and a bit about the story. And Mechwarrior certainly starts out quickly enough. You can't fault it there. You start out inside of a small battle mech mercenary unit, and after a quick training and the death of a couple people you care about, you're left in charge. What does in charge mean? Well, it pretty much means everything. All in the pursuit of finding the guilty party. You now control the entire team. You travel the game's universe split across the houses of the various leaderships, taking jobs for each, raising and lowering your reputation with them, all the while slowly gleaning out who was behind the attacks that decimated your family tree at the starting of the game. All of these ancient houses having existed for hundreds of years and holding ancient grudges. And the best way to pay back ancient grudges? That's right, jumping inside of mechs. Both third and first person views are available and taking on jobs like demolition behind enemy lines, destroying production facilities, or defending villages from different raiders, taking out enemy mech leaders to destroy command chains, and many more. When you come back into the shipyard, you'll be handling repair and finance with the mechs that are damaged, requiring time and money, both increased a great deal if you are in contested battle zones, as well as deciding where to go next, what job to take, hiring pilots, firing pilots, buying mech parts from random markets, both above and below board. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Now, choosing where to go is delineated by war zones. These are contested and they cost you more to upgrade and buy items, but it's also where the jobs are. Planets outside of these are either basically neutral or heavily industrialized, allowing for you to buy and sell at normal prices, and no real missions in most of them. Choosing where to go is a huge deal in Mechwarrior because each jump costs insane amounts of money to do, and this is the first place that the strategy of the game actually pays incredible dividends. Due to it costing more to repair and do work behind those enemy lines, a strategy really starts to build up, skirting the war zones, taking battles, then leaping out again to repair your damage, because it can quickly bankrupt you if you try to repair everything without that move, and I loved it. It made me feel like I was jumping into a mercenary leader's boots, and that requirement becomes even more difficult when you start to get damage on mechs. You really can't pay off right away, and you have to decide, do you want to spend money to jump out of the system and repair some of the mechs, or stay and repair all of it? And I was actually doing math on a piece of paper just to figure this out, because running out of money also means running out of the game, as bankruptcy is a no return situation. If you hit it, it's game over. Those overarching parts were awesome as well. Supply lines dry up as you buy and sell items, causing you to have to go to another system because you ended up buying everything you could while performing missions in the other. And there are hundreds of planets, many with missions on them, either random, quest, or campaign style. You also have to balance paying your pilots and watching them upgrade across skills like ballistics and energy and missiles and shielding, heat management and evasion, which all showcase pretty much exactly what they sound like. Put a pilot unsuited for the type of mech you have and watch them get roasted, just ejected again and again and again. Match them together and suddenly you're racing around through the dirt like you're in constant power band, just meh, 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 meh. And when you do decide what mission to take, you can negotiate with the contract giver, and I really enjoyed this. The better your reputation with that contract giver, the more points you have to adjust your final payout, the amount of salvage you'll have to be able to choose after the battle, which can include weapons and ammo, and yes, sometimes actually downed battle mechs, and lastly, insurance. This is vital and becomes this little mini game itself. Do you throw some points in there, assuming you'll be eaten up by enemy mechs and the contract giver covers the cost via insurance? Or do you just raise the amount of cash that you're going to get as a payout, even though it's a slightly smaller amount? I like this system. No, it's nothing new, but there's a tit for tat here that reflects the mercenary stylings of both the RPG and the board game variants of the fiction, and it just fits. It's just deep enough to make sense and just shallow enough to be easy to understand. Now from there you jump into the mech choices themselves. This is a screen with up to 4 mechs and their tonnage limit for the job, causing you to sometimes have to balance between 2 mechs with a light setup versus maybe 1 super heavy mech with a giant weapon. And that means taking into account also the job type. If it's a long drawn-out mission, you actually may want those lighter mechs, depending. You trudge through the jungles and the deserts and the moonscapes and the forests and open plains of various worlds and basically kill everybody you meet using a first or third person camera that are always interchangeable. If Mechwarrior got anything right, it got the weight of the mechs pretty much perfectly. If you take a Locust out, for instance, and you're balancing on your tiptoes ballerina style as you pop small shots into enemies, never truly standing still, it takes an excellent aim and a steady hand to play that way. Or do you enjoy smashing through alien worlds in the equivalent of a Battletech Hummer, smashing everything underfoot of the assault mechs? They're 100-ton Goliaths that soak up damage like a battleship and somehow move a little bit more slowly. And when you're doing all that battling, you can assign weapons to fire in groups, like 2 lasers or 2 lasers and a missile sortie, and easily choose between them. It's all about the heat that you do or don't want to generate in the battle. Most of the time, don't. So you can have all your weapons fire at once or even in a burst mode, but you're always balancing between their combined heat buildup and the heat sinks you've installed in your mech. Prepare to see yourself launching into the fucking stratosphere, though, on an ejector seat if you keep firing them all the time, because it will shut down your mech and can end up in your destruction. It doesn't matter what mech you are up against. Having yours shut down in the battles like casting the most successful aggro spell in a game I've ever seen. All of a sudden, 10 to 15 seconds, just consistently you're the artillery target as every jackass on the field starts launching everything they can at you. And since you're not moving, expect a number of those to target weak spots like your legs and arms, because in Mechwarrior it's not only about what you have equipped but where it is. It tracks damage for head and arms and legs and some side components, and if they go boom, the items go poof, leaving you with nothing. Upon completion of the battles, you're given a battle over screen, and here you can salvage equal to the number of points you bartered during the contract creation, as well as see the damage you took, if insurance paid for any of that damage, and the exact amounts you got. And lastly, it'll show what skill the pilots have gained experience in and if they went up levels. And then you're back on the ship, deciding how to best go about it all over again. Now within the ship you have your home screen, which is where you can pass time to wait for mech and item repairs and orders to fulfill, as well as a quick blurb of the number of contracts available in the locations. In the battle mech screen, you can adjust and repair battle mechs and retrofit them. You have the star map, which alerts you to battle lines as well as jobs by these little icons that are waiting for you, and contracts, which shows you the exact contracts in whatever solar system you're in at that time and what it generally pays. The market tab, this is a fully dynamic buy and sell economy. Then you have barracks for hiring and firing pilots, and lastly, operations. This is basically a breakdown of all the entire unit's costs, reputation, and otherwise. And yes, let's get this all out of the way when we talk about mech customization. When you leap in and adjust the mechs, you will notice pretty quickly that mech sections are hard points for a type and they cannot be changed. For example, small ballistic, small energy, large missile type, that kind of thing. And you can put a smaller component of the same type in those locations, but not two of them. Instead, variants come into play. With different variants, they have different setups. To the developers, this keeps the mechs feeling more individual and in a way does reflect the mercenary natures. You're not really fully redesigning while flying around as much as repairing or replacing. And to me, it didn't take very long to sort of get accustomed to it. It was fine once I started to get more mechs. This works also on the fiction, at least a little bit, that you're not flush with money. That's like hoping your McDonald's wage is going to cover that sweet Lotus you saw down at the car lot. It's not going to happen. Also, I noticed that the game has a general lack of overview in some sections. In particular, if a mech is under tonnage or has a destroyed weapon, the only way to actually see it in the mech bay is to click on the box for the mech itself. Tiny icons on each would have really helped clarity and quicker movement in those menus, and I just couldn't find them if they were there. Let's discuss control for a bit, or in this case, suggestion, because even in the smaller mechs, none of these things would be considered quick twitch. Add all this together and what you have is a competent, sometimes excellent feeling mech game. The sense of weight and speed and gargantuan bipedal death machines going at it while the world burns around them is palatable. But like so much with Mechwarrior, one good equals two bads, and this one is the AI. It's terrible. You remember that time you bought the pair of underwear on eBay that Steven Adler shat in while high during a Guns N' Roses concert? Yeah, your partner AI makes decisions about as useless as that. You can order them to follow you, which they'll do most of the time, but something else like attacking your target, expect them to sort of just somewhat play along. It's like theater for guns. Some characters, or at least some enemies, just don't seem to have patrols. Admittedly, the prior seems to happen, but only after you have the inevitable moment where you peek behind the curtain, and this wizard is a dude from a Sega Saturn running the AI. Even with very skilled pilots, outfitted in mechs with enough jump jets to set rocket speed records, they actually did not use the jump jets near as much as I thought they would. Also, most of the AI runs the barest of routines for evasion. In fact, if you watch closely, the tanks and the mechs do basically the same thing. They drive in circles. The tanks do it from far away most of the time, and the mechs do it right up in front of you, which at least makes more sense, but it can look hilarious with 8 mechs all running in circles, torsos cranked far right. While you can use cover, and you should because it actually works incredibly well, the enemy never really seems to. One thing I really did notice is that tanks will just sort of meander in circles in the open, and you can just sit there and hit them at the far end of their path to kill them. Luckily, what the game lacks in precision, it makes up for in sheer numbers of enemies and firepower. The heavy tanks pack a hell of a wallop, and even if the helicopters have the lifespan of a fucking top quark, they can still slam you with a couple missiles or lasers, and due to their height, they can make it quite difficult to hit if they get above you. Now, lastly, the game has instant mode for single player where you can set up and define various parameters for skirmish-style battles like map size, world type, time of day, and so forth, as well, of course, as that campaign. And you have co-op where people can join into your campaign or, once again, all of these random things you can set up. It's also pretty huge. The campaign itself is well over 25 hours, but due to how the sandbox style gameplay works, you can run around for tons more. It just depends on how much enjoyment you get from the various engagements in managing that mercenary team. To me, the secondary part ended up becoming a little bit more enjoyable than the primary. And that brings us to sound, music, and voice.
Your presence, Commander. I'm seeing multiple tangos on scope converging on your current position.
On the commander's target. guess we'll have to listen to him gripe about how rough we are on his battle mechs.
And we'll do sound first. It's pretty adequate. When missiles or high-power lasers smash into you, there is a nice heavy racket and bang that reverberates around the cockpit, and that all works. Firing guns or lasers or missiles sounds pretty good, though it feels a bit like a number of them don't have the assorted racket you would hope for or different detailed samples. Like you can hear a giant shell being ejected, but it's hard to hear if anything really happens in some of the bigger guns. One thing I did like is that hearing electronics and the engine spool up of the mechs gives you this feeling of speed, even though, let's be honest, the game's sense of speed isn't incredibly high even in the fastest mech, because they're not going that fast. Each mech does have a unique audio footprint, though, and that helps differentiate it. It's also awesome when you're in a huge battle with a bunch of enemy mechs and all these assorted weapons are going off, and for the most part, the audio is informative enough to understand who's firing what where, which is very helpful in some missions when jammers are being used that stop aiming and radar. As a presentation, average to good. That brings us to music. Now this is going to appeal to many hardcore Mechwarrior fans, probably, but to me, it is very basic and really not that enjoyable. A lot of it's typical hard rock stuff with some generic, really generic guitar and drum mixes that never really do anything to add to the atmosphere for me. The layered stuff when you're moving around the battle areas seems okay, and while there are a couple more complex tracks, the desire to channel that 1980s big robot fad seems to have almost worked too much in their favor on this. At its best, it was good for me. At its worst, it was forgettable enough that I can't actually even remember the tracks I didn't enjoy. I get why it's for some people, but for me, it's just not. That brings us to voice. And these are rough. Now, we can say who cares, but that's like showing up at a race, entering it, and then having everyone else run you over the finish line. If you're doing it, you might as well try to do it well. And here, nope. Especially the main voice actor. It's just all delivered like there's some kind of limit on emotions a person can feel. Wood, wooden, or animated wood. And it never gets better. And that brings us to fun factor. Mechwarrior 5 has a lot of small issues from graphics to sound to music to gameplay, and those hurt it, but there are a good number of fun moments to be found here. It's all a measure of what you can give up to experience them. I did keep returning to it to try one more mission, manage the money, and even that inevitable frustration of wanting a new mech, thrusting your hand into your pocket to grab some C-bills only to find some lint and a movie stub. That's pretty addicting. I enjoyed that. I also loved taking the harder missions on, or the combined missions, which is where a couple missions happen back to back without giving you the ability to repair in between. That felt stressful and frustrating, but in a good way. In fact, sometimes I wished I could just send my mechs down without me and then run the mech company from above. As you get more and more and more mechs, of which there are 50 plus, all, of course, having their own variants, it can be a bit like Pokemon, where you find yourself rushing to an alert that says a rare mech is on the planet, hoping to round out your assortment. It's a unique feel, and one I can't say I've felt a lot of times in games. And this is me right here, especially when figuring out the variants on each mech and what really worked in what scenario. That was the juice, and when you're squeezing out every last usable, workable bit from your mech so you can hit enemies just a bit farther away or just a bit harder, depending on what you need, and you pull out that hard-earned win, that is a blast. As you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, with rent being replaced by deep sale on PC titles, if that's the score I give it. But I'm not. I'm going to give it a wait for a sale. It does have some stuff that needs to be shored up, and I think people who like the prior games or who maybe are playing the online version need to look at this and really think about it, check out some videos, decide if this is what they want, because there are some differences here. But overall, it is still an enjoyable game. It still has a lot of randomization with that sandbox mode, even though I felt a little bit of repetition creeping up here or there. And I just love the fact that it's got co-op in the single player. I think that that is really useful, as well as that instant action co-op. I would also like to see them really go in there and nudge up a bit of information in the different parts of the HUD. Also, we don't know what the DLC will be, but that's neither here nor there. Speaking of here nor there, here's a picture of Lucy Liu rubbing someone's head. I'm not sure why, but I found it and I figured someone might need it. Anyway, that's it for me. Peace out. Check out the channel. If you get a chance, subscribe. It absolutely helps. Check out the Patreon. I'm not lying when I say that helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap, and I buy a copy of every single game I get, even if the dev gives me a code. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.